Now that we have a quorum, I'll go ahead and call to order the December 14th, 2022 meeting of the Street and Park Renaming Ad Hoc Committee. Thank you again to all of you for being here on short notice. Many of us were in attendance at last week's meeting. We made significant progress towards recommendations for names for the 6 facility streets and parks to be renamed. However, during the meeting, unfortunately, because a couple of the committee members had to leave early, we did not have a quorum for consensus on all 6 of the names. So I thought it'd be helpful to pull people back together where we had a quorum and we could ratify the direction that I believe that we were hearing last week. So first, before we do that, I will entertain a motion to amend or approve the minutes from last week's December 7th, 2022 meeting as written. Has everyone had a chance to see those minutes? And if so, would anyone like to make a motion?
I motion that we approve the minutes as written.
Okay, we have a motion from Committee Member D'Artes and a second from Committee Member Kessler. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Is there anyone opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved unanimously. Thank you. Next, call to the public. We will allow members of the public the opportunity this afternoon to address the committee for up to 3 minutes. We will limit total amount of public comment to 30 minutes. Is there anyone, members of the public, joining us today who would like to make a public comment?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead and state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
My name is Dominic Flores. I was a Tempe resident at 2027 East University Drive in Tempe, born and raised in Tempe. I'm here to speak upon my grandfather residency. My grandfather, Pete Obregon, Kiwis Obregon, was a middle son born in 1898, along with his siblings Felipe, Alfonso, Gilberto, Maria, Juan, Johnny, and Raymond were also born. And after my grandfather at the address at 54 East Dewey Street in Tempe by midwives. All of his brothers and sisters lived in the same residence through the 1950s. His family's names are all documented under the people and organizations in Tempe History Museum. In 1959, Tempe College changed to Arizona State University when the university was bought by my grandfather's land from his family. Later, that they built the ASU football stadium. In 1903, Pete, my grandfather, at the age of 5, helped build the old St. Mary's Church on 230 East University Drive in Tempe, later named Our Lady of Mount Carmel to accommodate the Lady of Mount Carmel School, in which ASU later purchased the land and moved the church to Broadway on Roll Road. My grandfather later bought a piece of property in Tempe for his wife and my grandmother, which was my grandmother Fidelia, where he bought the home at 2027 East University Drive, Tempe, Arizona, in 1960. This is where my grandfather resided until his death in 1991. He was an employee at Hayden Mill, as well as self-employed weekend farmer and baler with his own equipment. My grandfather grew overstock from his farm on Dewey Street, such as eggs, corn, squash, cantaloupe milk, and were always shared gratis with the community. Between the years of 1930 and 1960, Pete was often referred to as Don Pedro by the Spanish-speaking community in which he lived and worked, an honorable title for a well-respected humanitarian. He was honest and fair to his family and all the people he met. He set a great example for the family and the community. Pete contributed to the great good of Tempe and left his footprints behind for a reason. I believe his name would be a good alternative for one of the Tempe city streets. This is the reason my grandfather should be honored with being remembered as a good-hearted citizen of the city he loved. On behalf of myself and our family, we'd like to thank you for considering my grandfather's name to be displayed as an official street in Tempe. Sincerely, Dominic Flores, maternal grandson.
Nice.
Thank you, Mr. Flores.
You're very welcome. Thank you. Thank you all.
Appreciate it. Is there anyone else, members of the public, who would like to speak to the committee? Okay. Hearing none, we will close the call to the audience. Next, items for review and discussion. Today, based upon what I just said earlier, we will meet and hopefully finalize and ratify those recommendations for the park and street names for city council consideration. Let's go ahead and ask staff at this time to go over what was discussed at the last meeting.
Everyone, just incredibly brief, just going to share the names that you guys had decided on, had talked about. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. So just one slide, like I said, very quick and efficient. So these are the names that you guys had decided on. You guys had lost quorum when you were talking about Thomas Lane, you know, to replace Hudson Lane. And then I know there's still a little bit of conversation needed to be had about East Laird Street being replaced with Ragsdale Street, and that was another one that you had lost quorum for. But there's a general consensus around Redden Park, Michelle Brooks Totris Park, Harrison Park being replaced with Mary and Moses Green Park, Hudson Park being replaced with Park de Sotelo and Souza, and then with West Laird Street being replaced with Romo Jones Street. So it's kind of all I have, and you know, just kind of hoping to start some discussion.
Yeah. Thank you, Maddie. Can you go ahead and go back to that slide briefly? So for that portion, just to recap, I'm proceeding, unless I hear otherwise from the committee, that at a minimum, the four places, streets and parks where we had quorum and consensus, I'm noting it for today, and that we would focus on those two that we had consensus on, unless there's any interest on a part of the committee to revisit the other four. I was going to go ahead and proceed as such. Any questions or comments about that from the committee? Okay, very good. So let's move first to Hudson Lane. The conversation that we had and the consensus that we achieved for Hudson Lane, I think was that we were comfortable moving or to recommend to council that it be renamed in honor of Maggie and Theodore Thomas, and to be recommended to be renamed Thomas Lane for Hudson Lane. Is there agreement? Is there any conversation or discussion about that now that we have our quorum? Okay. Do we have consensus from the committee that that's the recommendation from this body to council?
Yes, I vote that we
Yes.
change it to Thomas Lane.
Okay. As far as voting versus consensus, I'm happy if we want to take a vote. I was thinking that if we got to a point where all six were, as we reflect here, that we would maybe do it all with one motion, perhaps, unless
Oh.
there's an interest in doing individual. But no, thank you, Kim. Okay, so with the quorum present today, we are also going to move forward Thomas Lane for Hudson Lane. Okay, so then let's go ahead and move to.
Andrew, if you don't mind.
Yes.
Looks like Hannah has her hand raised.
I'm sorry. Yes, go ahead, Hannah. My apologies.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say I went through and reread all the descriptions of all of these folks, and I'm happy to move forward with all of them. Just in terms of, just so you all know where I'm at on all this, I think they're all great.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else?
I'm from the public. I just have a question, Dominic Flores. So with me calling in and speaking on behalf of my family, it looks as if I wasn't at the last meeting, and I apologize. I was out of town and I wasn't able to make it. With all the decisions you've already made, and because I've already spoken on my family, it sounds like you've already made a decision on the names somewhat. Is that correct?
Right, to make a recommendation. I will say, since you weren't at our last meeting, that we had um, significant discussion about a host of names. I think a total of 11 for 6 facilities, streets and parks, and
Yes,
that
sir.
your grandfather, Obregon, I think we all agreed that was worthy of consideration for the naming of a facility at some point in the future, and that we were going to, as a committee, make a recommendation that as additional facilities are in need of names in the future, that we would recommend and request that Obregon, among the other names that we felt were the finalists, the 11 finalists, should be considered. So even though his name is not reflected in these particular facilities, we were going to make a recommendation that his name, with I think 4 other names, were going to be forwarded for consideration for council for future namings.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for letting me know that. I wasn't sure, and like I said, I just wanted you guys to know who our family was, and we're an old family. We've been there a long time. My mom's working on all the history right now to submit to the city of Tempe as we speak, so that you can hopefully all get that and know that we've been around. I'm a number 3 generation in Tempe, so I appreciate that you guys are taking that in consideration. And now, if you do that, are we contacted or are by the information that we've left you, or do we have to just keep looking and watching what's going on with the city of Tempe?
At the end of the meeting, I was going to talk a little bit about next steps, um, but I can mention briefly that, assuming we achieve the quorum and consensus on all 6 of these names today, that we would forward that and present to council our recommendations at a work study session. I'm thinking, because I know the first one in January is pretty full, that I was thinking of the first one in February, which I want to say is February
Okay.
6th. But
Okay.
we would provide that information to you and anyone else, who's been. We would put that on the website. I'll put it that way, is that we would definitely have that. We have a dedicated website for all things involving the renaming, and we would post that information there, so you and any of the rest of your family members would have an opportunity to be present for that. Assuming council, gives direction to staff to implement the recommendations of the committee, or whatever their final decision is on the renamings, then there would be a resolution that would be introduced to council at a future meeting, probably in either late February or in March. They would then vote, and then we would work with the appropriate groups, either city staff or post office, et cetera, to try to get those renamings completed by, we're thinking, the beginning of the next fiscal year, which would be around July, August of 2023. So there would be, notification, and we'd probably have some ceremonies, something like that, at the various locations where the renamings are taking place, and the public would be invited to that.
Thank you very, very much. I appreciate all that information. I'll let you get back to your meeting. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're quite welcome. And like I said, we are intending to move the Obregon name forward as a preferred name that's been looked at by our history staff and vetted. And we appreciate the additional information today from you, Mr. Flores. And we'll make sure that council knows that that's a name that we thought was very much worthy of consideration, and that we would recommend that for future namings that it be strongly considered by council.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, so with respect to the last name, we had discussed, and unfortunately we didn't have quorum regarding Ragsdale, but we did have, among those who were still in attendance at the meeting, we talked, understanding that it would not be part of the official record, but just to sort of talk through some of the merits of Lincoln Ragsdale, and we wanted to come back and talk about that. Since then, in the last intervening days, but since then, there's been a couple of other names that have been put forward. I did have a brief statement that one of our committee members who can't be here today, Shireen Lerner, asked, and I asked if she wanted me to read it into the record. And I said I would do that, and she said that was fine. So with your indulgence, I'll go ahead and read her her statement. And this is from Shireen Lerner. She says, I believe the committee and our residents have identified numerous Tempeans who are significant to our history and are worthy of having their names on streets and parks. I remain concerned about the inclusion of Lincoln Ragsdale, who was not a Tempe resident. As much as I admire Lincoln Ragsdale and all he did for civil rights, I do not feel he should jump ahead of Tempeans in this process. I know that Ragsdale was a leader in the civil rights movement in the Phoenix area and a veteran, and I understand the connection to bringing Martin Luther King to ASU. You mentioned a plaque for San Pablo. Why not one for where MLK gave his speech with recognition of Ragsdale's influence? La Victoria, Victory Acres, was established in the 1950s when Mexican Americans were forced off their land near ASU, San Pablo. One portion of the land, which was originally owned by the Tibshraeny family and then subdivided and sold off, was named Victory Acres as a result of World War II. It is almost an accident that the name of this development is as such. In particular, I do not feel Ragsdale is the right name for the La Victoria neighborhood. This is a Hispanic community who was forced to leave historic San Pablo and were relocated to La Victoria. There is no connection to Ragsdale. In my opinion, they should have a street named for someone from the Hispanic community who was part of the foundation of Tempe. As I mentioned, there are numerous admirable people who helped build the foundation of Tempe, who also had great influence during periods when African Americans and Hispanics were not welcome. For example, the Souza family, Manuela Sotelo, even the name San Pablo would be more appropriate for La Victoria. I do not feel that Souza and Sotelo should be combined into one to make room for Lincoln Ragsdale's inclusion. Both families made great contributions in their own right. I believe they deserve their own recognition, or San Pablo should be used as the street name as it has a direct connection to the community that lives there now. We have several impressive African Americans and Hispanics who lived in Tempe and made a difference and should be recognized. Thank you for listening. I hope you consider these concerns. Shireen Lerner. Maddie, I just, would you like to summarize? There were, again, a couple of other names that came in since then. I know we haven't fully vetted them like we did the other ones, but there was a couple of other names. If you could just quickly mention who they were.
Yeah, it seems like, from my understanding, and I could be missing something, but it seems like we only got an additional name from Lauren Kuby.
Okay,
But
that was Gustavo Gutierrez.
yep, and I don't know if it was directly for the La Victoria neighborhood. She never responded to me, so I did not receive that clarification. But Gail LaGrander put forward nomination of Gustavo Gutierrez. She had nominated him previously for an MLK Diversity Award when she was serving on the Human Relations Commission, and she was very pleased when he was selected. She had also attached a copy of his obituary, but other than that, like I said, I don't know if this was, asked for, connection to the La Victoria neighborhood. But that's the only other suggestion that I've received.
Okay. Okay. With all that information, I guess my question to the committee at this point is there anyone on the committee at this time who would like to have further discussion about the renaming of East Laird Street in honor of Lincoln Ragsdale?
It also might be important to kind of talk about Lincoln Ragsdale too. I don't know if Shireen Lerner had mentioned that he was Buffalo Soldier, and this is something that maybe Lisa Groom can speak to more if there is kind of a hesitancy with Lincoln Ragsdale. But at one of our initial meetings, there was the president of the La Victoria Neighborhood Association that he had, his only request was that it would be named after a veteran, and that I think that has been met. So if there's any questions or anybody would like additional clarification on that, Lisa Groom would probably be more than happy to speak, and looks like she has raised her hand.
She has. Go ahead, Lisa.
So actually, it was the information that I have about the Buffalo Soldier is actually Theodore Thomas. It's not Ragsdale, but what I was going to suggest, if we could consider, Andrew, because there's such an issue with Ragsdale and Laird, maybe switch Thomas with Laird. I know we were trying to put people in geographical spaces, but my is because I remember when Victor Jimenez came and said that his issue with renaming Laird was that he was a veteran. He was a World War II hero. Well, then it might make sense to move Thomas onto that street because he was a veteran and a Buffalo Soldier proven. And maybe it's just the name itself, not where we put the name, that's bothering them, because that may make more sense in Ragsdale. I'm all in favor of keeping Ragsdale, but
Sure.
I'm just wondering if it would be a different issue if we just switched it.
Does
that make
thank you,
sense?
Lisa. For what it's worth, from what I remember from the presentation last week in the comments, Lincoln Ragsdale was a Tuskegee Airman. I think that, so he was a World War II
Correct.
veteran
He was.
who was a fighter pilot as part of the Tuskegee Airmen. So clearly a veteran, while not a Buffalo Soldier. That was from a different era in U.S. military history, but he did serve in World War II. So there's some connection, I would say, between his service and the naming of Victory Acres, because it was named as a post-World War II subdivision, Victory Acres, in the aftermath of returning veterans from World War II, of which Lincoln Ragsdale would have been one of them. Even though he didn't live in that neighborhood, he was certainly a veteran and was noted as such. So thank you for that. I'll go back to my question then for the members of the committee, which is, does anybody on the committee at this time want to have conversation about entertaining other names or changing the recommendation for Lincoln Ragsdale to be the name Ragsdale Street instead of Laird Street for East Laird?
I'd like to comment.
Sure, go ahead, Kim.
I moved here in 1970. My father was stationed out at Luke Air Force Base. So I was pretty much raised here my whole life. And I remember the Ragsdales were the family that did most of the mortuary work for African Americans in Phoenix and the surrounding cities. So not only like Tempe, but Glendale and those surrounding areas. I remember their mortuary was very instrumental in serving the men and women from Luke Air Force Base. So that's my memory of him and their family before they moved. So I would recommend him as well. He is a staple in air history.
Okay,
I would like to say something.
sure, go ahead.
Joanne Cooks. And my statement would go along with what Kim Dartez just said, because when we moved here in 1969 and was looking for a place to live and all, we were referred to Lincoln Ragsdale at the mortuary, and we were told that he was the one that was very helpful in helping African Americans and other people, of course. But if we're trying to change history a little bit with the KKK influence and all, we need to acknowledge some of the African Americans here that have done great things for not only African Americans, but others also.
Thank you,
Thank
Joanne. Anyone else want to comment? Okay. Based on that, I'm going to ask, do we have consensus to continue with the recommendation to council that East Laird Street be renamed in honor of Lincoln Ragsdale as Ragsdale Street?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Anyone? Okay. Very good. So, Maddie, if you could put that slide back up that contains all 6 names. Thank you. At this time, I would entertain a motion from any member of the committee to approve the recommendation of the following slate of names to be recommended to council as the names to replace the existing names as listed in this slide.
I so move.
Okay. Was that you, Phil?
Yes, Phil Kraft.
Do I have a second?
I'll second. That's Justin Stewart.
Okay, we have a motion from committee member Kraft and a second from committee member Stewart. At this time, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 And I vote aye as well. Is there anyone opposing that motion? Okay. Motion to approve this slate of names and recommend to council is passed unanimously. Okay. Thank you very much.
Do we need any kind of motion for the additional names recommendation going forward to council?
Yeah, that's a good suggestion. You know what, as far as in terms of just making that more clear, Maddie, do you have those additional names? We had 5. I know one of them was San Pablo. There was one that was an indigenous name,
It was
Obregon.
Hohocamel, San Pablo, Okama, and Obregon were the 4 that were sent on the email to us.
Got it.
Yep.
Okay. Very good. Yeah, I'm happy to do that. So, would anyone like to make a motion?
I would make a motion that the 4 names be forwarded to council for future consideration.
Okay.
Second motion.
All right, thank you. We have a motion and a second to forward the names that were just read off by committee member Kessler to the city council for their consideration for future naming of facilities such as streets and parks in the future. All in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 All opposed? Okay, that motion also passes unanimously. Okay. At this time, I'll move to any announcements from any committee members.
I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, I'm so moved that Tempe is doing this. I think it's beautiful. I think it's healing. I think it's amazing. And so thank you guys, really.
Thank you, Kim. Anyone else?
I think the committee has been very thoughtful and insightful in their consideration of all the names that were submitted for our consideration, submitted by the public. And I think we have done a commendable job of accomplishing the goal of this committee.
Thank you, Mel, and I agree with that completely. Anyone else? I'll just take a second to, like I said, echo what Mel just said. I know we were all brought together for this purpose. Really appreciate the thoughtfulness, the time, and the consideration that you all dedicated to this. It's important. I think the word that's been used a lot in the committee is restorative. And given the history of the city of Tempe, which in many ways mirrors the history of the United States during that same turbulent time since the founding back in the mid to late 19th century to the present day, we've seen a lot, and there's been a lot of opportunities to do the right thing. And I think that this committee coming together and recommending these names, not just the 6 that were recommended for immediate renaming, but really the entire larger final list, which I think all of which were worthy, are an indication of the growth and maturity of a community that can take a hard look at difficult moments in our past and recognize that and do better and make recommendations so that we can create a more equitable and reflect the accomplishments of a much wider group of people, all of whom were dedicated to doing good work in this community and in this region. So, it wasn't easy, but the fact that we were able to come together and make these strong, unanimous recommendations, I think speaks a lot to the time and effort and consideration that each of you put into reading the materials and really understanding the significance of each of these names and the people behind those names. And I'm very, very grateful for this. And I'm sure that mayor and council will also be very grateful. And ultimately, the entire city will be as well. So I'm very much appreciative of the service that you've put in. I don't think we're going to have a reason for another meeting So assuming this is our final meeting, I want to thank you for attending these meetings. I would also encourage as many of you as can to be present at the future meetings, which would be the work study where we present the work of this committee, and then the regular meeting where the resolution adopting these as the official names occurs. I think having you in attendance, either virtually or in person, would say a lot to all of us, to the community, and to the council. So I would certainly encourage that.
And just to let you know, I will forward that information to you all when it does go to council. So know that you'll be getting contact for me too.
Anyone else before we adjourn?
I'd just like to say, in behalf of my family, I'm sorry. Julie, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say thank you for including me on this committee. I loved hearing the stories, and I really look forward to the education piece where we're explaining why we're changing these names. I think that's really important. So thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
I just
Anyone
wanted to
else?
say,
Go ahead, though.
I'm sorry. I just wanted
You're
to
good.
say thank you to all of you in the consideration of the next in the next meeting for a street or facility for my grandfather, and I'm on the phone with my mother right now, which is his granddaughter or his daughter, and she wanted to say thank you too.
Very good. We really appreciate your being here today, and I look forward. Like I said, there will be, I'm sure, a number of opportunities in the future to name facilities in the growing city that is Tempe. We may not be growing out, but we're certainly growing up, and there's probably going to be, I would assume, need for names in the future, in the not too distant future. So having that additional list that we've looked at, I think, will be very helpful.
Thank you.
I'd like to say something. I've been sitting here thinking, should I, shouldn't I? Having grown up in an all-black town in Mississippi and moving to the town of Tempe, a city of Tempe, I found some things that I wasn't accustomed to, because in an all-black city, we were very honorable to each other. But I want to thank the committee for finally acknowledging some of the work that our African American sisters and brothers have done for the city of Tempe. And I think that this is very honorable, what you're doing at this time. And I thank you very much for it.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you, Joanne. Thank you, Kim. Anyone else? Okay, hearing none. Enjoy your holidays, everybody, and we are adjourned.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas.
Thank you,
Happy
Andrew.
New Year.
Merry Christmas.
Thank
Toughen
you.
up, Cam.
Thank you.
Thanks for the
Thank you,
honor,
everyone.
sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.